Hello and welcome to episode 8 of Looking at Picture Books, and this time I decided to invite back my first ever guest, Fiona Woodcock, and invite her to interview me. So I'm going to be talking about my latest book, Tiny Penguins and the New Baby. But first of all, I'm going to share a couple of beautiful books, one old and one new. The first book I'm going to look at is Old Winkle and the Seagulls by Elizabeth and Gerald Rose. This was published in 1960 and it won a Kate Greenaway Medal. In those days a lot of picture books alternated black and white with colour spreads. So this is the black and white opener with some lovely herringbone texture on the fisherman's jacket. They all tease Old Winkle because he's friends with the seagulls and feeds them, and they think that's a ridiculous waste of time. But then the fish stop coming. Some beautiful colour on this page with that rich red pink and then the olivey green under the bottles. So nobody can work anymore because there's no fish. But the lorry driver has to drink 17 cups of tea because he's got nothing to do. Again, the colours are wonderful. The scientists at the Ministry of Agriculture are scratching their heads because they can't work out what's gone wrong. And then Old Winkle gets a message from his friend the seagull, who leads him to where the fish are. All the seagulls. I love this page with all those colourful fish in the water and the energy of the seagulls whirling overhead. So then he comes back and tells everyone about the fish, and off they go. Look at the sky in that spread. And the market is full of fish once again. Everyone's happy, especially the cat. And the mayor gets fish for his dinner, and all the fishermen are friends with Old Winkle. The next book I'm looking at is How to Mend a Friend by Karl Newson and Clara Anganuzzi. Karl Newson wrote this book when he was going through treatment for cancer, and it's a very heartfelt and empathetic look at how bad things affect people in all sorts of different ways, and you can help them in different ways too. It's a very good book for teaching empathy. And there's so much warmth in the illustrations, so starting with this lovely big hug on the first spread. And Clara's illustrations introduce lots of animal characters and lots of different environments, so there's plenty to look at and enjoy in these pictures. And some interesting compositions as well. I particularly like this spread with the overhead views. Nice icy page. Some lovely vignettes. I like the expression on that polar bear's face eating the cake. And another wonderful overhead view. Some glorious greens on there. You can be the greatest friend just by being you. A beautiful book. And here's my book, Tiny Penguins and the New Baby. The story's all about 5 little penguins who go into people's homes and do odd jobs. They're not actually very good at them. One day they find a little girl called Gertie who's feeling very sad, and they find out it's because she's got a new baby brother and she's feeling left out. So they break their golden rule and they say hello to her, and then they teach her their special penguin waddle, which is going to come in very handy later. They become very good friends and make things together. They make a bit of a mess in the kitchen. And then when it's bath time, they cause a terrible splosh. And the baby gets wet and Gertie gets blamed. So they try and think of a solution, but it's Gertie who comes up with the answer. And she does the penguin waddle and she makes the baby laugh. And that's the moment they start to bond, and then the penguins know that they're not needed anymore. So they head off to someone new to help. So before I say hello to Fiona, here's the tiny penguins to introduce themselves. Hi Fiona, how nice to see you. And
hi Jane.
Thank you for agreeing to interview me for looking at picture books about tiny penguins and the new baby.
Well, thank you for inviting me, because I was your first guest, wasn't I? And I've really enjoyed all the ones you've done since, which is adding up quite a lot, isn't it?
This is number 8.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure to talk to you about your book. It's about time we spotlighted one of yours. Why don't we start with the very, very first idea for Tiny Penguins? I'm wondering where that, because I know you went sketching at the zoo.
I did, although actually that came later, and I wish I could remember why penguins popped into my head, but I can't. But I do remember having a meeting with a publisher, which was a different publisher to Simon & Schuster at the time, and this is going back 7 or 8 years, and they looked at my portfolio, and for some reason they said, why don't you do something about something very, very tiny, and it'll feel like a doll's house. So that was really where it started. And then I developed this little dummy book, which is 2014. There were only 2 penguins then, and it was a very, very simple story. So that's actually me when I was little. I had very short hair when I was about 5. It's just about this little child who's narrating it. So the narrator changed completely in the
I wondered about that. Yeah, that's
the
interesting.
penguins that narrate it, but in this one it's the little girl. She's got a secret. Nobody knows except me, and the cat was in it. So the cat was quite a big presence at that point. And the fish. So not really all that much happened. They like cooking, so that stayed in.
Yes.
And in fact,
and those kitchen tiles.
The kitchen tiles, yes.
Yes, I recognise those.
This is actually the only bit of artwork that made it into the final finished book all those years later. And the floor is collaged with little bits of engravings from an old bound volume of Punch magazines that I got in a junk shop once. So yeah, there they are. They do some cooking, they make a mess, they wash up and they break everything. So that core idea that they're helpful but useless was there at that point.
And does it have the same interplay between the text and image? Because I really love that aspect of how it sort of, in the final one, it mentions, you know, like polishing the shoes up beautifully, but meanwhile they're chucking tomato ketchup all over the place. You know, that sort of lovely, so that the viewer has got that.
It's the opposite of what it says.
Yeah,
no, that kind of came later. But they're putting footprints everywhere. So I suppose I didn't mention the footprints at that point. The payoff is that she thinks they're secret, but the mum actually knows about them all along. And she used to have tiny anteaters when she was little, and she's got them in her pocket. So it was a bit crazy and surreal. I still really like this version, but it needed more.
I mean, I'm always reassured to see that other people's books take a long time.
Very long time.
You had that initial idea, and then did you develop it some more before it ended up going to Simon & Schuster?
No, I don't think I did develop it a lot more. So the original publisher, it was just a bit of bad luck, really. They said, oh, because we hadn't talked about penguins at that time. And then when I presented with them with this penguins idea, they said, oh, that's very bad luck because we've just commissioned another book about 2 penguins. So
yeah,
it went back back on the shelf for a while. And when I presented it to Simon & Schuster,
I think it was a 2-book deal, so it was the second part of the King Otter deal. So at that point, I think they really just loved the title.
Yes.
And thought, we'll work on the story together.
It's interesting how sometimes, and I think it's always reassuring for the people to know that it's not always a complete thing. Sometimes it could be just some really strong designs that are just asking to be a book, and the book isn't resolved yet, but you can see there's potential there. Exactly. And I think it's really lovely when a publisher can see that there's something, you know, they just know there's something good about it, and they have that confidence to know you'll get there.
Yes, so that is really exciting that they believed in the idea enough. But then, of course, I had the problem of what on earth was going to happen in this story. And I went through so many different versions. So I'm just going to show you some extracts from my comic diary, which is a really useful way of looking back and seeing how things were shaping up at the time, and also the timescale. So I put dates on these.
Great.
So here we are, the 17th of December 2018, just before Christmas, first meeting with Holly Tonks, who was new at Simon & Schuster at the time. And so she said, we love the tiny penguins, but what's their motivation? I went to the Charles Dickens Museum, which is round the corner, and I was brainstorming away. Maybe they find a message or a child's drawing or a list. And then I put the little penguins in there, keep thinking. So then went to the zoo and looked at the penguins, and I was trying to just look them in the eye and work out their motivation, and they weren't that much help really, but it was looking at penguins. And so here I am, 10th of January, still struggling. Could a rescue mission work? Here I am on the 19th of February, finally getting somewhere. So this is where the babies come into it. And the baby was actually Holly's idea, and it was a really, really good idea. And then finally, I went in to see them again at Simon & Schuster on the 20th of February, and I was really nervous about whether they were going to like it, and they were really pleased. That was the story really pretty much sorted.
The actual design, the character design of the penguins, they seem to arrive fairly fully formed. I guess there were only 2 to begin with, but then they sort of evolved, I suppose, a bit with their props and the odd beret, and
that was the thing. I had to really give them props, because otherwise it's just so difficult to distinguish penguins, which are basically the same, apart from Teeny, who's just a smaller version of the same thing. So Teeny's the only one without a prop, and all of the others have got some little distinguishing feature, all with the same kind of colour palette. So this is one of the early sketches where there were actually bunk beds then, fish fingers all over the floor. And this is quite interesting, because I had completely different names for them then, and I can't even quite remember why they changed. So there was going to be one called Geoffrey with a top hat, who was a little bit of a Fred Astaire penguin. This is just a little bit of work in progress. So I went through so many versions of these little mini thumbnails. Then what I do is I cut them out and stick them together into a little book. Quite often there have to be some really hard sacrifices, aren't there, when you're making a book? Yeah. Like because that is a really strong image. So I can see how you would try and get it in there. And it's just that thing of admitting, okay, so it's not doing anything for the story. So, you know, like sometimes you can get it on the back or on the title page or something, but it's the hardest thing. I always tell myself, oh, well, I'll put that in another book one day. And so you were sort of getting to talking about starting on the artwork. Yes. So should we talk a little bit about that? Because I know there's I'd love to just hear what your technique was, because I know there's a little bit of collage in there, not as much as you often do in some of your other books, but there's a tiny bit of collage. I've actually got this huge, just to give people an idea of the amount of stuff that goes into making a book. So this is all the artwork. So it's all done by hand on paper using gouache and coloured pencil, but some of the individual elements are on different pieces of paper, and then they're scanned and collaged digitally. So I'll just show you first. This is my little colour palette, my swatches. Beautiful. Didn't necessarily exactly stick to this, but I made this after going to the Pierre Bonnard exhibition at the Tate, which I went to 3 times because I loved it so much. And that was really, really influential on the colour palette, all the sort of turquoise, yellow and the purpley colours there.
Gorgeous. I always think that's one of the lovely things when you're just at the right stage in a picture book. You can go about life, going to exhibitions, looking out train windows, or anything could potentially inspire the colour palette or feed into it.
Exactly.
Was there a specific painting? You bought postcards from the Bonnard?
I did buy a lot of postcards and I just stuck them all to the wall. So there wasn't one in particular, although obviously there's quite a lot of bath scenes, and I've got a bath scene book, so
yes.
I think that was a bit of a subconscious influence, perhaps even on the story as well as the colour palette. So I'll just show you. So for example, you were mentioning about collage. So this is Gertie and the baby. It's all gouache except the little stars. I've got a little star-shaped hole punch. Those are collaged on.
How do you order how you sort of progress through the artwork? Do you sort of pick favourite ones and sort of leave the hard one to the end? Or
yes I do.
And you don't do it sequentially?
Systematically, not at all, no. I do have a little chart and I cross them off on the chart, but it's fairly random. I probably should be a bit more systematic about it.
If you're able to, I think it's quite nice to sort of intuitively feel your way through it, because I think you probably just know the sensible ones to do first, to just establish things and build up to the really important one where you'll really know how to do it by then.
Kind of start with the one you're most excited about as well, maybe.
Yeah.
Oh, I even at an early stage I was toying with using buff coloured paper and rubber stamps, so that's a little
that's interesting
experiment. And here's one of this is a pencil. I made the large roughs. I drew everything in coloured pencil, scanned it, put it together, and then used a light box to work.
Yes. I love that everyone does it slightly differently, but there's no right or wrong way, is there?
There isn't, no, it's like whatever works for you.
Yeah.
And I've just found, this is funny, in the scene where they meet the baby for the first time, these are 2 of the characters, and it was only after I'd completely finished I realised I'd done an accidental Judith Kerr.
That's brilliant. I made a note to mention that to you because I spotted her when I was looking through it this morning.
It was completely subconscious.
And something else I wanted to mention, and I think I mentioned it at your launch, that whether there was a little theme with you with sort of little helpers, because King Otter had the little hedgehogs, and it did make me think of what was it called? The Elves and the Shoemaker.
Yes, well, funny you should mention them because that was my favourite fairy tale when I was little. And I think, you know how some children dream of being the princess or whatever. I dreamed of being the elves and I wanted to secretly make things all night.
It stays with you, doesn't it? I mean, I loved that book as well. And I still often think about it. I mean, and that's the power of children's books. That's what we hope that Tiny Penguins will be doing, won't it? I
hope so.
You changed it to have it from the penguins' perspective. Was that quite a sort of breakthrough moment?
Yes, it was actually. Yeah, it really made it funnier, I think, and more playful.
And are there any little sort of personal things you'd like to point out to us in the book, Jane, like inspiration for things?
That's another really nice thing. You have the power to do that when you're an author and illustrator. So the floor in the kitchen scene and the kitchen units, in fact, they are my childhood kitchen. And I've got a photo of me having a rummage in a cupboard when I was probably only about 18 months old. And you can see that the cupboards and the floor are just the same as Gertie's kitchen. And then
brilliant.
The cat in the book is our family cat, Karl.
Who's having his tail painted. Yeah, this cat's very tolerant.
It's a very, very patient cat. And then all sorts of little things like the Russian doll on the back cover and the sugar. There are various bits and pieces from around the house.
There's a really gorgeous framed picture of a little ginger cat in the frame. Amazing. I'd like to know more about that cat and possibly see a book featuring it.
Yeah, Maybe that's what I should do next. I think that's probably subconsciously Orlando, the Marmalade Cat. So I'm getting in another.
Do you think so? Yeah.
Reference. Yeah.
They're the favourite.
Hale's books.
So after such a long development time, eventually the book was done.
Yes.
But as we know, that's not when the work stops, is it, Jane?
Not at all, no.
So would you like to tell us a little bit about what happened then and how you celebrated it and how you've been able to share it with your readers?
Yes, yeah. Well, as you know, there's always a huge long gap from when you send off your last bits of artwork till you get the book in your hands, which can be very frustrating, but that's just the way it is. And one of the things I love to do in that time is make 3D characters. I've got here are my little tiny penguins. So
and they're the ones I think I remember seeing a really charming stop frame animation.
That's right.
Of those.
Yes. So I made those to make the animation. It was just really fun. So this is needle felting. I actually took them on a school visit this week for the first time. So they've been out and they've met some children, and it was just so nice to have something physical passed around to kind of enhance the idea of the story. I also really had a lot of fun designing my Tiny Penguins finger puppet. So
brilliant.
I just thought this would be a really nice resource for people to download. So I'll put a link for finding out more about that below the video. It's
very clever because you can cut them all out of one A4 piece of paper, can't you?
Exactly.
Yes. So it's super. I mean, actually, in fact, I know because I did do them myself, and they've scampered off all around my home.
They're like
I've still got these two. Yeah.
Have they polished your shoes for you?
Yeah. What would you say your aim for the book was, and do you feel like it achieved it?
Well, I hope so. I mean, obviously on one level it's a new baby book, so I hope there's going to be children out there who've got a new baby who might be feeling a little bit.
I've got a feeling there's a few out there.
I hope so. I hope it'll bring them a bit of comfort and consolation. And but even for children who don't have a new baby in the family, I hope it's just inspires people to have that imaginative journey, and the joy of making things, I think, as well, is embedded in there with the little cardboard house that Gertie makes for the penguins, and just playing with the shoes and pretending they're something else, and making the pictures. I think all of that's kind of being in your imagination and being creative with it. That's probably, for me, that's the core of the story.
That's so lovely, and it's such an important message, and it's so you as well.
It is very me, it definitely.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. I suppose it's my chance to just congratulate you, Jane, because it is a really lovely book.
Oh, thank you so much.
And also thank you as a guest host. Thank you for sharing so much. I'm sure people are going to be fascinated to hear.
I hope so, and thank you for interviewing me.
It's an absolute pleasure, Jane. Thank you.
I'm going to end, as usual, with a quote from a book. And this time it's from Helen Oxenbury, and it features in Show Me a Story. And this is something I really, really believe in very strongly. So Helen said, one of the most important things is to laugh with your children and let them see you think they're being funny when they're trying to be. It gives children enormous pleasure to think they've made you laugh. They feel they've reached one of the nicest parts in you. As a picture book artist, I don't think one can be too much on the side of the child. Thank you for watching Looking at Picture Books. If you've enjoyed this episode, do click subscribe and leave me a comment in the section below the video. See you next time.